Welcome to the deep dive. If you spend, any time online, you've probably seen Reddit. It's this huge, fascinating place, right? Communities for basically anything you can think of. But today, we're kind of pulling back the curtain, looking at its structure, its shadows, you could say. We're going to analyze how Reddit's actual design, its architecture, creates these really predictable, kind of powerful engines for radicalization, and especially how it fuels the spread of some dangerous health conspiracy theories. Our focus is really on that journey. How does someone just browsing casually, maybe asking a question, end up with these really entrenched, extreme beliefs, step by, almost calculated step?
That's exactly it. That's the core of this deep dive. Our mission, if you like, is to unpack those mechanics, things like anonymity, the way subreddits wall themselves off, the whole karma system, and then trace that pathway that model researchers are actually calling the radicalization pipeline.
Yeah.
It's surprisingly predictable.
Yeah, the paradox is really striking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because Reddit's whole success is built on freedom, right? Letting users build their own little worlds. But those exact features, the things that make it work, also create the perfect storm for these echo chambers. Insulated bubbles, and this mix, the freedom plus this gamified social thumbs up. It seems to pull in users who are maybe feeling vulnerable, people looking for clear answers, maybe validation they aren't getting from, say, mainstream sources or institutions.
That's a crucial point for you, the listener, to grasp. The platform isn't just a neutral box holding content. The way it's built actively shapes the kind of content that thrives there. So the problems we're talking about, they aren't really bugs. They're more like features baked into the design itself.
Okay, let's dig into that architectural engine then, starting with the most fundamental piece, the subreddit structure itself. We're talking about this segregation, or the term researchers use is ideological homophily. Basically, users sorting themselves into these super specific groups that already match what they believe, like conspiracy or maybe something more niche. It creates this perfect walled garden, doesn't it?
That walled garden idea is spot on. And once you're inside those walls, the key mechanism keeping things insulated is the volunteer moderator. These folks aren't just janitors cleaning up spam, they're often acting as ideological gatekeepers. Research shows they actively manage the conversation to maintain purity, often by just removing stuff that disagrees. If a comment challenges the core belief of that subreddit, poof, it's gone. Not debated, just deleted.
Wow. So if you're someone coming in maybe with genuine questions, trying to understand something, you literally only see posts and comments reinforcing the dominant view. Your doubts just get erased. You're left with what the source material actually calls a reality distortion field. That's quite a phrase.
It is, and it makes sense, right? When you systematically filter out any counterarguments, you don't just maintain the group's belief, you actually accelerate it. Anyone who might offer a different perspective or facts that don't fit, they get pushed out or silenced. So what's left is this core group whose beliefs just get stronger and maybe more extreme with every single interaction.
Okay, so that filtering, that systematic removal of dissenting voices, that's one big part. But the other huge factor you mentioned is anonymity. Reddit doesn't need your real name, which people often say is good for free speech, right?
Okay.
But how does being anonymous specifically fuel misinformation and radicalization?
Well, anonymity is definitely a double-edged sword. Its immediate effect is lowering the social cost of saying extreme things or sharing false claims. If your name, your job, your reputation isn't tied to your Reddit account, there's basically zero accountability, you see. You can post stuff online you probably never, ever say out loud or, on your LinkedIn profile.
Right. And there's a psychological shift that happens too, isn't there?
Absolutely. It leads straight to something called de-individuation. It's a known psychological effect. You stop thinking of yourself as an individual person like, I'm Sarah, a parent worried about my kid's health. Instead, you start identifying really strongly with your group. I am a member of our true unvaccinated, or I'm someone who gets what's really going on. And that shift makes you way more vulnerable to groupthink. You start adopting the group's beliefs, even the extreme ones, because that group identity gives you certainty. It gives you belonging.
Okay, so anonymity removes the brakes, the accountability. Then you have the karma system providing the gas pedal, the reward. This whole gamification of belief. How does a simple upvote push someone towards radical views?
The karma system. It's incredibly effective as a behavior-shaping tool, mainly because it's so instant and quantifiable. Imagine a user posts something really inflammatory, maybe framing doctors or officials as, villains. That sudden flood of upvotes, it's instant social validation. It's literally a dopamine hit. And crucially, the the system rewards outrage. It rewards confirmation bias, telling people what they already suspect. It doesn't really reward accuracy or careful nuance.
And the platform's algorithm sees all those quick upvotes and comments as high engagement. So the most emotionally charged stuff, the most outrageous post, they shoot to the top faster than, say, a careful, boring, evidence-based explanation, which creates this relentless feedback loop, right? The wildest claims get the most eyeballs.
Exactly. And there's a flip side, too. If you dare to inject some facts, or maybe some skepticism, what happens? Downvotes, hostile comments, people calling you names. This creates what researchers call the spiral of silence. People who know better or have credible info, they quickly learn it's just not worth the hassle. It's like being digitally shouted down or shunned. So they just stop talking. And the result is the whole conversation shifts further and further out because the only voices left are the ones willing to embrace the most extreme, emotionally satisfying takes.
Right, okay. So now we got a picture of the underlying structure, the environment that allows this to happen. Let's trace the actual journey a user might take. This radicalization pipeline you mentioned, it seems like health conspiracies are a really clear case study for how this works, often in about 4 phases.
That's right. Phase 1 is the starting point, the ingress of the vulnerable user. People don't usually start out looking for extreme ideas. They often start with real fear or maybe a grievance. It could be deep anxiety about health after getting a scary diagnosis, or maybe strong distrust after a bad experience with the medical system, or just that overwhelming existential fear like during a pandemic. They might feel isolated, worried, and they come online looking for real information because maybe they feel like the official sources aren't listening or aren't telling the whole story.
And they don't jump straight to the really weird stuff, do they? They start somewhere more moderate sounding. That's phase 2, the seemingly reasonable gateway community. These subreddits often have deliberately neutral, even positive names like Our Health Freedom, or maybe Our No New Normal back in the day, or Raskin Unvaccinated. They usually start by questioning specific things like, are masks really effective? Were lockdowns the right call? Was this drug approved too quickly? And because those questions resonate with a lot of people feeling maybe skeptical or left out, it works like a really effective entry point, a trap door almost.
And that's where the outrage really starts to cement the group identity. Which brings us neatly to phase 3, escalation and group cohesion. The discussions shift. It's less about questioning specific policies now and more overtly political, more accusatory. The posts that get the most upvotes, the most traction, are the ones that successfully paint the other sides. Doctors, public health, the media as acting in bad faith, as actively malicious.
And this seems like the crucial psychological turning point. That initial, maybe specific worry, like about a vaccine side effect, it gets woven into a much bigger story, a grand conspiracy narrative. It's not just about assessing risk anymore. Suddenly it's Big Pharma and Bill Gates are poisoning everyone for profit and control.
Exactly. And that kind of grand, systematic explanation provides enormous psychological comfort. Certainty. In a confusing world, a big conspiracy theory offers a simple answer. It makes you feel like you have the special knowledge, the real truth. It gives a sense of moral clarity, even superiority. You've basically shifted from someone with a health question to an identity as well as part of a resistance.
And then, the final step in this pipeline, phase 4, migration to hardline echo chambers. This often happens when, say, Reddit finally bans one of those big gateway communities, like Our No New Normal. The users don't just disappear, do they? They scatter, but then reconcentrate.
That's right. The most engaged users, the true believers, they often use cross-links or other methods to shepherd people towards more extreme subreddits, often ones that are smaller, less public, or they might move the whole conversation off Reddit entirely to platforms with even less moderation.
So let's take that example you hinted at earlier. A parent worried about a possible link between vaccines and autism.
Yeah. They might post in a mainstream parenting forum, just asking questions. Someone directs them to a vaccine-skeptical gateway subreddit. There they find tons of validation, lots of upvotes for expressing their fears. Over time, that outrage-driven system we talked about, it actively selects for the most extreme versions of their worry. So their narrative escalates from, maybe there are some risks we should discuss, to, oh my God, doctors are knowingly poisoning children for money. Then, if that initial subreddit gets banned, the ban itself becomes proof of the conspiracy. See? They're trying to silence us. And that pushes them even further down the pipeline, often into communities where their health fears start mixing with completely different fringe ideas. QAnon, flat earth, election denial, it all cross-pollinates.
It's a chillingly effective model. And it really highlights why we need to be clear about the terms we use. People often throw around misinformation bubble and echo chamber as if they're the same thing, but they're not, are they?
No, they're definitely not the same, though they work together like gears meshing in a machine. They serve different functions. Think of it like this. The misinformation bubble is mostly about content visibility. It's driven by the algorithms, by that speed difference where lies and sensational stuff spread way faster than careful corrections or debunking.
Okay, so the bubble is the supply side. It's that viral, easy-to-digest falsehood like mRNA vaccines will change your DNA that gets tons of upvotes and shares before any expert can even respond properly.
Precisely. The echo chamber, on the other hand, that's about the social interaction layer. It's driven by who you choose to listen to, who you hang out with, online selective exposure, and it's driven by social reinforcement within that group. It leads to ideological insulation. It's about who you trust and whose reality you accept within that specific community.
Got it. So the two create this devastating feedback loop. The misinformation bubble delivers the viral lie, the supply. The echo chamber provides the demand, the community that embraces it, normalizes it, shares it more. And crucially, the echo chamber then actively rejects any attempt to debunk the lie, labeling it as propaganda from outsiders or shills.
Exactly. The echo chamber is what takes a piece of viral junk content and cements it into someone's core belief system, their identity.
Which explains why just playing whack-a-mole, deleting content, or banning groups often doesn't really solve the underlying problem.
Right. You might burst that particular bubble for a moment, but the echo chamber, the group identity, the trust network, the shared narrative that stays intact. And it's just waiting to latch onto the next piece of viral content that fits its worldview.
Okay, so that brings us to the really tricky part, mitigation. If just banning things doesn't work or even backfires by confirming the conspiracy, what can be done? What proactive steps could platforms or even the communities themselves take?
Well, it really has to be a multifaceted approach because, like you said, simple takedowns often just result in the whole pipeline reforming somewhere else, sometimes within weeks, maybe on a different platform entirely. We have to think about addressing the psychological drivers, the group dynamics, not just the specific pieces of content.
I was intrigued by this idea mentioned in the research, soft moderation tactics. It sounds like prioritizing education and setting norms over just hitting the delete button. What does that actually look like?
It's often about timing and context. Instead of waiting for something bad to spread and then deleting it reactively, you use proactive tools, like setting up auto-moderator corrections. You can configure bots to automatically respond to posts using certain keywords, say mRNA, 5G, or specific controversial terms. And the bot immediately posts links to credible, neutral sources like the CDC, WHO, or major scientific studies right there in the thread. The key is getting that factual context in before the emotional responses and outrage take over the conversation.
So it's like pre-bunking instead of debunking after the fact.
Yeah.
You're trying to inject a bit of friction, a bit of factual grounding right at the start.
That's the idea. Add necessary friction. Another tactic is establishing clear community norms that require credible sourcing. If the rule is you can't just make a wild claim, you have to link to a reputable source, like a study from PubMed or a report from a known health body. That immediately slows down the spread of low-effort, high-emotion falsehoods and memes. Of course, the key is consistency. The rules have to be seen as fair and applied evenly, otherwise the moderators lose legitimacy fast.
And what about changes at the platform level itself? What kind of big algorithmic shifts could actually disrupt this flow without completely killing user engagement, which we know platforms worry about?
Well, the core issue is the current engagement model. Outrage drives visibility, drives revenue. That's the fundamental problem. Platforms need to seriously consider tweaking their ranking algorithms. They need to factor in things like source, credibility, and the reputation of the domain where information comes from. It shouldn't just be about raw upvotes or comment velocity. If a post gets, say, 10,000 upvotes in an hour, but it comes from a brand new account or links to a known conspiracy website, maybe it shouldn't be boosted to the top of everyone's feed quite so quickly.
So you're talking about maybe slowing down the spread of viral claims, particularly those coming from unverified or dubious sources, giving things time to be checked.
Exactly. Things like time-delayed boosts for certain types of controversial or unverified claims. It could take some of the immediate rewarding heat out of the outrage cycle, but realistically, these are tough changes for platforms to make. They often worry, probably rightly, that dialing down the viral outrage might also dial down user activity and ultimately their ad revenue. It's a difficult balance.
But perhaps the most powerful intervention, and the one that we as listeners actually have direct control over, is building our own individual resilience. How do we stop ourselves from falling down these rabbit holes?
Yes, this is absolutely critical. It's about deliberately working against the echo chamber effect in our own minds. The key practice is cultivating what you might call epistemic humility, which basically means training yourself to pause before you hit upvote, before you share, before you even fully believe something you see online. And ask yourself two really important questions. First, how do I actually know this is true? And second, what kind of evidence would genuinely make me change my mind about this?
That first question, how do I know this, forces you to trace the claim, right? Instead of just accepting the group consensus or the emotional pull of the post, where did this really come from?
Precisely. And the second part, actively seeking out disconfirming evidence, is just as vital. It's the direct antidote to the echo chamber. If you only ever look for information that confirms what you already fear or believe, you're just reinforcing the walls of your own bubble. You have to deliberately look for well-sourced arguments, credible data that challenge your current view. It feels uncomfortable, but it's how you break that cognitive pattern that locks radical beliefs in place.
This has been, well, a really deep dive. We've seen how Reddit's success, its varied structure, the anonymity, the segregated subreddits, the gamified karma, how these things also make it uniquely vulnerable, how it can effectively turn personal fears, anxieties, maybe legitimate grievances, into these deeply radicalized identities, often centered around harmful health conspiracies.
And that brings us right to that final kind of provocative thought to leave people with. Think about what happens when a platform does take strong action, like banning a really popular problematic subreddit. For the users inside that bubble, inside that echo chamber, that action is often interpreted completely differently. They don't see it as moderation enforcing rules. They see it as proof. Proof of censorship, proof of persecution. It confirms their deepest narrative. They're trying to silence us. They don't want you to know the truth. And what does that do? It often drives them off the platform, yes, but into even more isolated, more extreme spaces, encrypted channels, fringe forums where the ideological bonding gets even stronger. So the real challenge, the massive dilemma for platforms and for society, isn't just how to remove harmful content. It's how do you possibly disrupt that radicalization pipeline psychologically without taking actions that actually end up confirming the conspiracy narrative for the very people caught inside it. It's a huge structural and psychological puzzle. And honestly, right now it feels almost impossible to solve cleanly.